Welcome to BioBiz Buzz, the podcast where we explore the cutting-edge science and the business of biotech and pharma. I'm your host, Mike Ward, the Global Head of Life Sciences and Healthcare Thought Leadership at Clarivate, which is a leading provider of the insights, intelligence, and data that the healthcare sector is actually using to accelerate its innovations. In this episode, we're diving in deep into one of the most exciting frontiers in cancer treatment, radioligand therapy. So the concept of using radioisotopes to actually treat cancers has been around for decades, but it's only in recent years that we've actually experienced explosive growth in the radioligand therapy market. I mean, it's projected to reach something like $42 billion by 2032. Radioligand therapy represents now a paradigm shift in the way that we're actually approaching cancer treatment, moving from broad spectrum chemotherapy to precision targeted radioactive treatments that can seek out and destroy cancer cells wherever they may hide in the body. Today, I'm joined by David Bejker, who's the CEO of Affibody, a Swedish biotech company that's actually at the forefront of this revolution. Affibody has developed a unique platform based on engineered proteins called Affibody molecules. These are small, robust targeting vehicles that are perfectly suited for radioligand applications. With over 20 years of experience in radioligand development and more than 200 patients dosed, Affibody is well positioned to actually have an impact in this rapidly growing field. So, David, welcome to BioBiz Buzz. I'm going to start with the big picture. As I sort of mentioned, the concept of radioligand therapy has been around for many decades, but recently we've seen unprecedented growth and investment. What industry challenges is Affibody addressing that make this such a compelling opportunity?
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. To start off, I think that's an excellent question to start with the big picture. I mean, you're absolutely right about the market momentum that we're seeing in radioligand therapies. And it's right now experiencing a remarkable growth. And as you said, even though it's been around for decades, in the recent years, we actually see this kind of blockbuster movement in this field. And I think it's driven by some obvious mega trends and then also by some smaller things that are radioligand specific. But if we start like with the mega trends, we do still have this aging population that increases incidence rates of cancers. And although we've had a lot of breakthroughs in the cancer field, and patients on average actually have much better prospects today than historically, I mean, we still see unmet medical needs, and some of them are pretty major, actually, especially when we're talking about advanced metastatic disease and later line of treatment where more traditional approaches, such as you mentioned, with chemotherapies, etc., aren't really doing the trick. And what actually makes our field, the radioligand therapy field, revolutionary is this ability to deliver targeted radiation directly to the cancer cells. I mean, we know since, let's say, 200 years that radiation can actually kill cancer cells quite exquisitely when we talk about external radiation. But to bring it into the body, to bring it exactly in the vicinity of the cancer cell, to irradiate it that way, that's what's kind of driving this revolution. And we see real commercial successes in prostate cancers and in GEP-NET tumors. And those products, they have actually driven up the interest in our space as well. There are some technical challenges, though, and I think that's the kind of the challenges we at Affibody are trying to address. Most of the platforms we see now, or the approaches we see now with peptides or small molecules, they have a rapid clearance from blood, which risks radiating the kidneys too much and could limit the therapeutic window and potential therefore. But at Affibody, we're trying to engineer something that goes with a high amount to the tumor and low amounts to critical organs.
So tell us then, sort of the Affibody molecule platform, how does it differ from, say, for example, the traditional antibody-based approaches?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's fundamentally different from a monoclonal antibody. It's only about 6.5 kilodaltons, so a 20th of the size of a monoclonal. And this size thing, that gives us a couple of key advantages. We can penetrate, we can distribute better to tissues, and we can clear from the blood rapidly. So this is perfect if you think about high contrast imaging and you want to have diagnosis within hours rather than days. And the robustness of this small packed protein is also something that's really important here, because we can exquisitely engineer and modify it in ways that are a little bit more tricky. And contrary to peptides, the behavior of an Affibody molecule is a lot more predictable. We know that they are stable, they're robust, they behave the same way across different molecules. So what we've done is that we created this library of billions of unique, well, tens of billions of unique Affibody molecules, each with different binding specificities. And we used that to bind of our choosing, so to speak. And it's because of the engineerability, it's actually quite easy to modify our proteins to make them adaptable to different types of radioisotopes. And it allows us to deliver the radioactive agents with unprecedented precision and minimize side effects.
Before we sort of go specifically into some of the areas that you are focusing on, there has been a lot of talk at the major conferences about radioligand therapy and how it's an exciting space. And yet it's clear that the market still faces several manufacturing and logistical issues. I mean, particularly around the fact that, the short half-lives of radioisotopes. So how's Affibody coping with those supply chain complexities?
Yeah, I think you identify one of the critical challenges in the industry here that we need to think about as an industry. So, I mean, radioisotopes, they decay within days, or in some cases, even within hours. So it creates this need for a truly just-in-time supply chain, which is quite different compared to your traditional pharmaceuticals that you can keep on the shelf normally, or even in fridge and freezers. So you can't really stockpile inventory in the same way as you had before, because the isotope is, you can think of it actually as a melting ice cube that you're shipping, and the ice cube has to have the correct size when it's administered into the patients, because the potency then, of course, decreases by the minute. So we think that our platform offers several advantages here. First, I mean, the Affibody in and of itself is very robust, which means that they can demand super harsh conditions when we label these drugs and put the isotopes on them. They're stable at high temperatures. We can handle acidic and alkaline conditions. And this stability is then crucial. And we've also partnered with leading manufacturing players, logistic players, to use their distribution and supply networks. And I think one of the reasons that we are really pushing the radiopharma space right now from our side is that we now feel that there's been a workup in the hospitals, at the sites, and with distribution chains, that this is now doable for a multitude of companies.
Okay, so let's look and sort of see what you're doing actually is being applied and potentially has the opportunity to have an impact for patients. So let's dive into your HER2 program. HER2 positive cancers affect millions of patients worldwide, and the HER2 targeted therapy market is, I understand, projected to reach tens of billions within sort of the next 5 years or so. So it'd be interesting to sort of understand, again, in that crowded market, what's unique about Affibody's approach.
Yeah, so HER2 is an excellent example of how our platform can address an unmet medical need. So this is a space that was opened up now 40 years ago and has been a truly revolutionizing, especially breast cancer care, right? So HER2 positive breast cancer, that's about 20 to 30% of all breast cancer patients. And we've seen targeted therapies and trastuzumab-based ADCs and pertuzumab doing really, really well here. And they can actually target cancer cells that are expressing the antigen. But what we see is that there's a development of resistance for these mechanisms. And we also know that HER2 is a lot more heterogeneous nowadays, HER2 expression, than we used to know before, right? So our lead diagnostic agent, called tesatabep, or ABY025, it targets a unique epitope on HER2, which is not the same as any of the current targeting agents, the monoclonals, which means that we can diagnose patients with our drug or our imaging drug while they're on therapy. And we also seen, based on our experience with this, or more than 200 patients, as you said in the beginning, we know that we can detect metastasis within hours. We know that we can discriminate between truly positive and truly negative, and even find HER2 ultra low patients with this that would be amenable to therapy. And kind of building on that success, we developed the 271, our therapeutic candidate. And now we're using lutetium-177 to deliver cytotoxic beta emission to the cancer cells. And in the preclinical studies, this has looked beautifully, and actually even in combination with monoclonal antibodies. And we've just started to enroll a patient in the trial and anticipate to have some early clinical data during this year.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, that's interesting. And I mean, playing around with radioisotopes is dangerous. And therefore, not surprisingly, the regulatory landscape for radiopharmaceuticals is complex, especially, given the fact that different regions have different rules. So as you're going into the clinic, etc., how does a company like Affibody navigate such challenges?
So I think that you're right that the landscape, regulatory landscape here for radiopharmaceutical is a bit complex, right? Because we both have a drug and a radioactive substance. So it's kind of this intersection between our normal regulatory authorities and some of the authorities that govern radiation and radioactive substances, right? So to add to that, different countries think about this differently. So some countries, it's more clearly pharmaceutical, and in some other countries, it's more clearly a radioactive substance. So there are some regulatory, let's call them inconsistencies, that you need to kind of navigate. And our approach has been actually, we've had numerous interactions with a couple of agencies in Europe and, of course, in the US. So trying to do that early on and from the beginning, which means that we've done actually more extensive preclinical work than you normally see in the radio field, because we want to be able to address those countries where it's more normal pharmaceutical. We've also worked a lot with kind of nuclear medicine specialists, regulatory experts, to ensure that our development program really meets what's required from a regulatory perspective. And I think because of this extra interest that the market has generated over the years, I think we'll see that regulatory agencies are more professional. They would demand more than they used to maybe 10, 20 years ago from our industry as well. And one of the good things and we've gained a lot of invaluable experiences with our imaging drug that we've been pushing forward here. So that has helped us answer numerous key questions together with regulatory agencies.
So, I mean, it's interesting, this whole radioligand space. Recently at Clivate, we did a companies to watch, interesting sort of startup or companies that are on the cutting edge in this radioligand therapy space. And Affibody was obviously one of those companies that we featured in that report. And part of that, the reason why we sort of selected that, was that we're seeing many sort of major pharma companies making billion-dollar bets on radioligand therapy. It's clearly a very, very competitive space. So how does Affibody differentiate itself in a crowded field?
Yeah. So if I start off with kind of thinking about those acquisitions and deals that we've been seeing, that, Novartis, BMS, Lilly, AZ, they've been kind of moving in there, which I think highlights the strategic importance of the field, as you said. So, but a lot has to do with kind of securing infrastructure. And they've been working with what I would call more traditional targets and traditional approaches like peptide or antibody-based targeting, right? So our differentiation is that we're trying to find and use our molecules to have optimal pharmacokinetics for radioligand therapy. So we modulate half-life using albumin binding, we reduce kidney uptake with that and linker technologies. And the idea here is to have a flexibility for what you want to have, instead of just looking for a certain isotope and a certain target that it fits. And I think that's proves the versatility of our platform. As we talk about, we have the HERTI program, we have a B783 program that is progressing really, really well preclinically and looking to go into the clinic quite soon. And thirdly, we have this the fact that I talked about before, that compared to peptides, we know what we get with Affibody molecules. That's important in manufacturing, in labeling, and actually in this entire developability aspects of it. So that's kind of how we try to position ourselves. This is have a target and find the optimal pharmacokinetics rather than be wed to an isotope or a certain target.
As I understand it, the therapeutic antibody development field, it still faces significant challenges, whether that's around discovery or characterization or even manufacturing costs. So again, I'm sort of intrigued, the Affibody platform, how would it help companies address those issues?
Yeah, we're trying to address all of this by systematically using our library, using our understanding of the pharmacokinetics and the biodistribution properties of our drugs to make a more efficient discovery and development process. So we use standard phage display, which we complement with a lot of in silico state-of-the-art approaches for epitope choosing, formatting, and all of that stuff. So that's as a field that has exploded in recent years. Of course, we're really quite well situated. And I think that I already bore you guys a lot with the engineerability of our molecules, but that becomes super important here because there's a flexibility and a viability to change, which could be super important in the context of the tumor milieu or in the context of not coming into critical organs. And another thing is that we're starting, or we have a lot of clinical validation in other fields other than radiopharma, and we're starting to get that now in the radiopharma, and that kind of demonstrate robustness and versatility of our approach here.
Unlike sort of many biotechs, you are, I mean, clearly you have your own clinical programs, but partnerships is sort of a very, very key part of the biotech business model. So can you sort of discuss what your approach is to partnering and how you sort of see that such collaborations would actually create value for biopharma itself?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we've always had this approach to partnering as a way of enhancing a strategic position. So, we want to enhance potentially a strategic position of a product together with the right partner, but more importantly, to kind of enhance the value and the strategic position of our technology so that we can, I mean, it can be widely applied across multiple therapeutic areas. But we want to find these differentiating places by bringing in partners that have complementary expertise and resources to us. So one of the things we're doing is that we're expanding beyond oncology to respiratory diseases with our collaboration with the Chiesi Group. And this is kind of a $600 million deal for us that together with one of the, of course, most competent players in the respiratory field, work to see how a small construct like the Affibody, a mini protein like the Affibody molecule, could be made ideal for respiratory disease, maybe via inhaled delivery, and get some other modalities into that market. And by working with someone like Chiesi, we actually get world-class expertise in that field, understanding the models, understanding how you think about positioning there. So I think it's a good way to think about it, expanding into new field together with someone that has lots of experience there. And it's also, I think, partnerships also kind of create this broader value for the ecosystem. And I think in particular of the radioligand space, where we have isotope manufacturers, we have logistics players, we have some outpatient centers are coming up there, especially in the US, that can deliver this specialized cancer care to patients. So if we can make partnerships in that ecosystem work as well, that will create true value for patients. So faster access to novel therapies and a more streamlined treatment plan, so to speak.
Yeah, that's interesting. And particularly the point of, radioligand therapy going beyond oncology, which I must admit, wasn't something that I was that aware of. It's something that hadn't really hit my radar screen. So, what you're doing with Chiesi, I think will be interesting. And as we sort of look ahead, what are the key milestones or opportunities that listeners should be watching out for, especially from Affibody?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things, but most importantly, I would say that we anticipate this first clinical data out of our HER2 the 271 program, and this we expect during this year towards the latter end of the years, but still. And this will be the first human data on our therapeutic approach in radioligands. It's of course super validating and important here, and it's positioned in an area of very high unmet medical need there, so super interesting. And then we're moving our second therapeutic radio program, our 071, we call that the B783 program. We're moving that ahead also towards the clinic, so hope to be able to kind of present something at conferences on that preclinical workup. And we think that's a very interesting target for radioligand therapeutics. So I think those two programs, data around that, data from our partnerships that are outside of oncology, of course. And I think we're kind of, from a business perspective, we're really quite well positioned in the radioligand field. We work with novel targets that aren't as, even though they're very validated cancer target, they're novel in the radio pharma space, and we think we have the technology to solve that. So that's kind of why we're excited about this opportunity as well.
Well, so that 071 molecule, the B7H3 program, as a target, why is that an important one?
So, I mean, I think B783 is overexpressed in many different cancer cells. We see some antibody drug conjugate being developed, and I mean, they have been okay, but not stunning, right? And we think one of the potential opportunities with radio here is that we can kind of overcome some of the issues that ADCs have seen in that space. So it's broadly across different cancer types like colorectal, pancreas, etc. So it's super interesting. It's non-small cell lung as well. So
Right. So, I mean, it seems like there's a huge amount of potential. So, can you sort of, in a nutshell, describe how you think Affibody and radioligand therapy is actually going to transform cancer care, particularly over the next 5, 10 years?
yeah, I think what we see with radioligands is that they actually have a pretty benign adverse event profile or safety profile if you compare it somewhat to some of the more novel super potent drugs like ADCs or similar things. So I think if we can find targets and technologies that are really amenable to radioligand therapy, and we think we have one of the technologies, of course, and we, and for B783 and HER2, we believe are good targets here. So our vision is that we can actually make, together as an industry, we can make radioligand therapy a standard of care across multiple cancer types. Because this ability to deliver targeted radiation to cancer cells and kill them, that is something unique for our technologies. It's regardless of location, a tumor can't develop a resistance mechanism to this type of technology because it's actually just breaking the DNA via radiation. So we think that over the years to come, we'll see radioligand therapies going earlier and earlier. We'll start in metastatic diseases, as we've already seen, but we think that there's a great potential to actually become first and second line treatments with radioligands, at least the way it looks right now.
So, David, I mean, this has been a fascinating deep dive into both the radioligand therapy space and also actually, what Affibody is doing with its innovative approach. I mean, the convergence of advanced molecular engineering, nuclear medicine, precision targeting clearly represents an exciting development in modern cancer treatment. So, for our listeners, the key takeaways for me are clear. Radioligand therapy is rapidly moving from experimental to mainstream with, as I said earlier, market projections exceeding $40 billion within the next 6, 7, 8 years. The differentiating technology platforms and strategic partnerships, companies like Affibody are well positioned to actually lead in this transformation. So, it's clear that there are a lot of small companies who are at the cutting edge, who are addressing many of the challenges. But the challenges are significant, from manufacturing and supply chain complexities, as we've discussed, to regulatory hurdles. However, the clinical results, industry investment all suggest that this is going to be a very interesting space to look at, particularly with its potential to revolutionize cancer care. So, as we've discussed, the ability to deliver targeted radiation directly to cancer cells will represent that fundamental shift in the therapeutic approach. So thank you, David, for joining us today and sharing your insights into Affibody's groundbreaking work, and also that broader view of what's actually happening in the radioligand space. So for more information about Affibody and its radioligand therapy programs, you can visit their websites, either affibody.se or affibody.com, which I think is more recognizable to people. That's all for this episode of BioBiz Buzz. So I'm Mike Ward. I'll be back soon with another deep dive into the innovations that are shaping the future of biotech and pharma. To keep update, subscribe to BioBiz Buzz, and we'll keep you informed of future releases. Until then, keep innovating, and goodbye.